Welcome everybody back into Nerd Sesh. As always, I'm Carson Bradford, and alongside me is Logan Camden. And today we are going to be talking some NFL free agency because a whole lot has gone down so far. And Logan, your Pittsburgh Steelers have kind of been at the forefront of this. They really kicked off free agency with the news that they were going to be bringing in your favorite, Mr. Unlimited, Russell Wilson, on just a 1-year, $1.2 million deal. What's your take on that move?
Well, I want to start with Russ's really concerning 2023 season stats because I think people look at the raw numbers and those can be deceiving sometimes. 26 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. But when you think about what Russ was asked to do in this offensive system, it makes sense that his season would look really efficiently. First of all, Russ has always been a guy that's really good at protecting the football. He is quite literally one of the most efficient quartersbacks ever. I wish I had gotten the stat before we came on, but I mean, he's like, I think he's still top 5 or something in career passer rating. It's
touchdown
ridiculous.
Interception ratio, he's top 5.
Yeah, I mean, you look at any of the efficiency metrics and Russ will knock your socks off. So that's good. But those numbers are a little deceiving because Russ wasn't asked to do a whole lot, and Sean Payton really didn't trust him. These stats are courtesy of Warren Sharp from Twitter. 27% of his throws were from behind the line of scrimmage. That's number 1 out of 509 qualified quarterbacks since 2005. It's not great. 62% of his passes were within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. It's number 2 out of 509 qualified quarterbacks since 2005. And 26% of his passes were between 5 and 15 yards. That's the lowest mark out of 509 qualified quarterbacks since 2005. So bottom line, Russell Wilson is not a guy that Sean Payton trusted to push the ball downfield, to read the field, to make decisions, and watch a game. I mean, most of Russ's tape is him taking a shot, a snap out of shotgun, and throwing it to the flat, to his running back, throwing it to the flat, to his tight end, throwing it to the flat, to his wideout. And you know what? I'm not going to knock him too much because Denver had playmakers, and it worked. You know what I mean? Like, Denver was really good at not turning the ball over towards the middle of the season. They were winning games. They were really methodical drives, and a lot of times that was the right read. But it is concerning to me that an offensive mind like Sean Payton didn't trust a veteran quarterback enough for him to draw up more convoluted concepts where they are making big shot plays. And that's really where I think the Steelers' offense excelled at the end of last season. Mason Rudolph forced the ball to George Pickens, and that is the number one thing, Carson, to me, about Russell Wilson coming to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Russell Wilson has to get the ball to George Pickens. I think he is a bona fide superstar in the making. I don't think it...
What does G stand for? What does G stand for, Logan?
The G, I was going to get to that. The G stands for get him the damn ball. You need any quarterback that is starting for the Steelers. That was the biggest issue with Kenny Pickett, and when Mason Rudolph took over, that was no longer an issue because Mason wasn't scared to try to get the ball to George. George is a bona fide superstar, number 1 playmaker. The body control, the hands, the separation, the speed, with the ball in his hands, he's crafty. Like, he's not Antonio Brown. Like, he's not that kind of weapon, but damn, man, he is a number 1 in this league, and I truly believe that. I think that is my number 1 concern with Russ, is that all the check down stuff, if Russ doesn't get the ball to George Pickens, that's a problem because we need to get the ball into our playmakers' hands, and he is a bona fide number 1 playmaker. 18 yards per catch last season, over 1,000 yards on, I think, mid-50s of catches. I mean, a ridiculous season. That's number 1 to me, is get George Pickens a damn ball. The bottom line is, I really do like this for Pittsburgh. We get a guy like Russell Wilson for dirt cheap, $1.2 million. He is by far the best quarterback on the roster, and I want to clear something up right now. Kenny Pickett has no opportunity at starting this season. You're not going to go out and sign a Russell Wilson and then have a QB battle in training camp, okay? Kenny Pickett is a long-term project now for Pittsburgh. We have put him effectively on the back burner. It's very similar to what it looked like last season when the New York Jets signed Aaron Rodgers to me. That Zach Wilson was going to learn, be his understudy. That's what I think is going to happen. I think Kenny is going to be the understudy to Russ, and I think Russ, this is his prove-it year to either other teams or to the Steelers if he can stick around. Kenny Pickett doesn't have a shot at starting. I'm sorry. That's not happening. Russ is going to be the starter of this football team. But unlike Kenny or unlike Mason, Russ legitimately gives the Steelers a chance to win a playoff game. That is the goal. That is the bottom line. That has been the hump that the Steelers have been trying to get over for 8 years now. They haven't won a playoff game since, I think, 2016. There's a lot more structure, I think, in Pittsburgh than in Denver. I think the skill position talent better. I think the defense is better. I think he's got a good offensive mind here in Arthur Smith that is going to try to establish the running game. Again, with Najee and Jalen Warren in the backfield, I think there's a lot of pressure alleviated off of Russell Wilson's shoulders that is going to allow him to hand the ball off, pound the ball, control the game, not turn it over, and hopefully make plays when the Steelers need him to make plays. And like I said, number one rule, Russ, you got to get the ball to GP. That's number one. The one thing that I've harped on, Carson, that you know, though, is we cannot have a hoorah Marine Russell Wilson come up in here, man. We cannot have high knees on the plane. We cannot have you running an imaginary football game when you're not starting. That clip was so funny to me. I don't know if you saw that after he got signed.
Oh, yeah.
They showed when Drew Lock started a game in 2020, or it might have been Geno. I don't know who it was in 2021, but Russ didn't start the game against Pittsburgh. And he's running through an imaginary game. No ball, no players, no line. He's pretending to make throws. That's not going to work here, okay? And Russell's personality really concerns me about what he is going to do in Pittsburgh. The fact that you heard in Denver under Nathaniel Hackett that Russ was like a celebrity that his other teammates can't touch. Pittsburgh is a very down-to-earth, real organization. If Russ comes in here with that nonsense, it's not going to work. The fans are going to turn on him. The locker room is going to turn on him. He needs to be real, and he needs to be a leader here, but I think it can work. And like I said, I think that Russell Wilson gives the Steelers their best chance to win a playoff game. I mean, it's not even a question. He is by far the best quarterback that the Steelers have had since Ben Roethlisberger. And now that Mike Tomlin legitimately has a guy that I trust a little more, like I trust him way more than Rudolph and Pickett, and that's the bottom line to me. Mike Tomlin has churned out 10-win and 9-win teams with the Duck Hodges of the world, with massive injuries to Big Ben, with the Mason Rudolphs, with the Kenny Pickett's. I mean, the Steelers, to me, are going to win 10 to 11 games, but they're legitimately going to have a chance to win a playoff game this season if Russell Wilson is healthy, and that's a difference. So I think this is a great pickup for Pittsburgh. I would have preferred Justin Fields because I think Fields has actual upside, but with his speed, with his youth, I mean, he's got still a cannon of an arm, but Russ is a controlled variable. You know what I mean? I know what I'm getting with Russ, and I feel like he's going to be a lot more consistent, right? Fields is really volatile. Wilson is a constant, and for that reason, I'm really pleased that we were able to get Russ for such a cheap deal, too.
There's no question in terms of value, it's a good move just because you got him for effectively nothing. I mean, he is $1 million against the cap, which is also just hilarious because now Denver has to eat all the remaining money that he didn't get. And the Steelers were not in a good position to nail an upgrade at quarterback because they obviously were not in good position in terms of drafting to get one of these top guys. And in free agency, the options are kind of like, are you going to pay Kirk Cousins 4 years, $180 million? Because if not, you're basically looking at replacement level kind of guys. And I know that you've been adamant about not going all in on that sort of like above average win now quarterback, but potentially at the expense of the rest of the roster because it's such a big cap hit. And I think Russ is probably better than Mason Rudolph. I think that he should be the day one starter for the Steelers and is a little bit of an upgrade. I don't know that I'm as optimistic about him being a needle mover in terms of winning a playoff game, though, because everything that you laid out, he is still very much a game manager at this point in his career. Just averaged a career low in terms of yards per attempt, his fewest yards per game since his rookie year. And there was a real conflation throughout this season of the Broncos' team success with Russ improving. When what we saw was the Broncos started winning games when they asked Russ to do less and less and basically said,
I mean, how many turnovers a game?
Exactly. It was our defense is balling out. We're forcing 3+ turnovers a game in the middle stretch of the year, and we are pounding the football on the ground. That's when they started winning. It really had nothing to do with Russ taking his level up. He had an 8-game stretch where he threw for 200 yards once, and that was the best 8-game stretch of the year for the Broncos. So I don't think that there is a Russ revival in him. I think that if we were going to see it, it probably would have been last year under Sean Payton. And what we saw was marginal improvement from like a complete disaster class the year before, where it felt like his decision-making was worse than we've ever seen before. He was making mistakes. He was in probably the worst physical condition that we've seen Russ took a step up from that disaster in 2022, but he is by no means a good, above average starting quarterback in the NFL. He's still more experienced than the alternatives. He's better than the alternatives. And so I like it from that perspective, because the other big swings, it's like if you get Kirk Cousins, you're going to be a better football team. Kirk Cousins is way better than Russ, but I don't think that you're opening a Super Bowl window. And if you are talking about Justin Fields, I'm not super optimistic that that would have worked out. I just don't know if that is a favorable enough situation offensively for Fields to thrive, because I do think he needs a lot of good things in place around him just with the level that he's at in a vacuum. And then if that doesn't work out, well, now you have to trade for him, and maybe the trade price isn't too high, but okay, at some point you're probably going to have to throw him a contract, or that's just sunk value, whatever you did give up in the trade. And so this is a safe, very low risk option, but they are ultimately still in the same spot that they have been for more than a half decade at this point, really ever since Ben got over the hump and in the post Le'Veon and Antonio Brown era, where they just haven't had the offensive punch to compete in these playoff settings. I don't think Russ changes that. You are going to be able to lean on the run game. It's a good run game. It's not one of the league's best. I know that you love George Pickens. I still don't think this receiving core, although it's good, stacks up to the league's best, and that's just the remaining problem for me. They don't have that A-level thing offensively whatsoever, and that's why year after year, like, yeah, they improved when they put Mason Rudolph in there, but this was still the number 28 scoring offense last year. When they got into a playoff game against a team with a high-powered quarterback, the Buffalo Bills, which is not an uncommon thing in the AFC, they never stood a chance. They were never a serious football team in those playoff settings, and I just don't think that Russ changes that, unfortunately. But maybe there was no move out there that could easily change that this offseason, and so from that perspective, I get it as a very safe, short-term solve.
Yeah, it's a trial run. It really is a trial run. It's going to be a year for Russ to prove to either the rest of the league that he's still got it and he can go get his bag next offseason, or it's a prove-it year to Pittsburgh where he can be our guy. I am very optimistic about this move, because you say that he's not much better than Mason, and maybe not talent-wise, because I do think that's a misconception about Russ. And this, I can't remember what analyst said it. Somebody was like, Russ is really good at extending plays and doing this. And I was like, maybe 4 years ago in Seattle when he had his MVP season. That's a misconception, I think, about Russ right now. He is not a big play threat. He is not when you think about Russell Wilson, you kind of think about the Fran Tarkenton shit, right? Him scrambling behind the line of scrimmage, extending the play for 7 seconds, finding a guy downfield. Russ doesn't do that anymore. He is a game manager through and through. I am very optimistic about this. Now, I want to ask you a question, though, because you aren't as optimistic. And I always, as a Steelers fan, I'm clouded by my...
Super Bowl window's always open in Pittsburgh.
It's always open, man. It's always open. I want to ask you, what do you think is more likely with Russ at the helm? The Steelers win a playoff game, or the Steelers miss the playoffs completely?
Miss the playoffs completely.
Okay.
The Steelers shouldn't have made the playoffs once in these last few years, and they've made it twice in the last 3 with comfortably negative point differentials. Like, it baffles my mind. I fully buy into Mike Tomlin voodoo magic and the fact that the defense is going to make clutch plays, and if it's special teams, whatever, they'll find a way to overcome a bad offense to get to that 8-9 win range. But to get to the point where you're beating a higher seed in the AFC, be that Baltimore, Cincinnati, Buffalo, or Kansas City, I just do not see it, man.
I understand that, and I just want to add on, the reason I am a little more optimistic about this year, too, is it's not just one variable changing. Omar Khan is a genius GM. I am so glad that we have him. Kevin Colbert was always really scared to make moves in free agency or make moves in the draft. Like, his biggest free agency move, I remember, was like getting Ladarius Green in 2013, and that was a colossal failure. Omar Khan is not afraid to go out and make moves like this. And there's a lot of variable change, right? Like you said, if it was one variable change, I might not be as optimistic. But we're getting an Arthur Smith. We are getting a Russell Wilson. We are getting a new offensive staff under Arthur. There's a lot of moving parts here that make me a little more optimistic this season than normal. So and again, I would never pick the Steelers to probably win less than 10 games because that's just somehow what they figure out how to do. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I think the Steelers have crushed this free agency so far. Again, at the end of the day, it's very low risk. If it doesn't work out, then Russ will just bounce off somewhere. And I really don't want to go back to Kenny Pickett, though.
Wow. That's another thing that stood out to me. When you compared this situation to the Jets situation, I'm like, I don't think the vision in New York was that Zach is going to sit back for a year or two and learn. I think the vision was, okay, Zach, you are now our backup. And Kenny, I think, is QB3 in the Steelers locker room, just in terms of how good he is right now.
Talent-wise, yeah, but I think with us getting Russ, I think Mason Rudolph is going to leave. He's a free agent right now.
Yeah.
And if I'm another team, I'm really intrigued by his tape. I do think it's a fundamental misstep by the Steelers. Like, the tape, this is all I'm going off of. I'm not going off of Mason's track record. The 3 games that we saw Mason play at the end of the year, I was very, very impressed with. He looked like a starter in the 3 games that he played.
Yeah, if Sam Darnold is going to get a chance to be a starter.
Yeah, man.
You think that Mason Rudolph probably deserves it too. The other move that you guys made, which I think is splashier and more of just kind of an objective win, stealing Patrick Queen away from the Ravens for 3 years, $41 million. You talk about Omar Khan being aggressive overall, making some more of those big-time free agency moves. How much does that move the needle for you with Pittsburgh?
Carson, I know you know this because I've been harping on this for 4 seasons now. Ever since Ryan Shazier went out with that and got paralyzed, man, that was so heartbreaking for the Steelers organization because we had a game changer with that core at every level. Having TJ, Shazier, and Minka, and I don't know if Minka and Shazier overlap, but that was the idea, is that we would have a difference maker at every single level. And Patrick Queen is a legitimate disruptor and needle mover for me. Great run stopper. He is explosive off the line of scrimmage. He's a middle linebacker that if you run him on blitzes, he can get pressure on the QB. And linebacker has been by far the weakest position of the Pittsburgh Steelers, maybe outside of interior offensive line over these past few years. We had Mark Robinson out there, 5'10", 200 pounds. He's safety size. And all the injuries last season, I'm very excited about the linebacking core, not just with Patrick Queen. Quan Alexander, Cole Holcomb hopefully coming back. There's another guy that I'm forgetting now too, but this is the deepest the Steelers linebacking core will be in years, and Patrick Queen is by far the best linebacker, point blank, period, that the Steelers have had in a long time. And Carson, you talk about paying like big money. That's something that I think fundamentally, you tell me what you think about free agency. I would really move away from paying quarterbacks these ginormous contracts. You're telling me that I can get a player the caliber of Patrick Queen for 3 years, $41 million. You telling me that I can get Derrick Henry for 2 years, $16 million? Screw that. Screw paying Kirk Cousins $180 million. I'll figure out quarterback. I know it's the most important position on the field, but every other position outside of edge rusher, D tackle, and quarterback are like the premier. You got to throw a bag at somebody.
And every receiver now. Receivers get paid now.
Every other position, you can get guys at insane value. Like, I could not believe the Steelers got Patrick Queen for what seems like such a cheap contract. I think it's a home run, and now we legitimately have a superstar at each level. TJ, Queen, Minka. I'm ecstatic, Carson. I think, I don't know, this is the most excited I've been for a Steelers season in a long time, man. I think Omar Khan is an evil genius.
Yeah, I really, really like this move. I think Patrick Queen is just flat out elite. I think that his speed covering the field is ridiculous. He's just such a versatile, impactful linebacker all around. And the Steelers are going to have to win games on the back of an absurd defense. And now you've added another just superstar level talent to that defense. So I really like it from that perspective. I do think when you're talking about the quarterback dilemma, these massive contracts that we're seeing, we have absolutely seen in recent years how this, I don't know if I want to say inflated quarterback market, but just the reality that you have to give these guys $40 million a year, that can go very, very south when it's the wrong guy. Danny Dimes, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, Derek Carr. We see these instances where you are just like begging to get out of these situations a year into them because you have obviously overpaid a guy who is not of the caliber where you have to pay him that figure. That being said, there is a threshold. And maybe it's not Kirk Cousins. Maybe it's a little bit above that. Maybe it's Dak Prescott. But it is so, so important. It is so vital if you want to be any sort of serious football team to have a really good quarterback. The ideal situation, of course, is to get a guy who can give you that value on a rookie deal, but that's pretty rare that you're able to actually accomplish that you just have to pay them. And NFL cap can be so fake, and you can restructure, and Josh Allen just got restructured, and the Bills cleared up another $17 million, but it's just non-negotiable with a lot of these guys. But when you do it with a guy who's really on the fringe, I mean, if you're really having second thoughts about it, then you're probably better off not paying that guy, because it can sink you and it can just create a nightmare for your entire front office and composition of your football team for a couple years. But nevertheless, Kirk Cousins did get that money. Atlanta did give him 4 years, $180 million. What did you think about that, Logan?
I do think it's a bit of an overpay. You look into the details of the contract, it's $90 million guaranteed, 24, 25. So he is going to be their quarterback through 2025. That's guaranteed. And then 2026 and on, there's just $10 million guaranteed. So basically they can get out from under that money after 2 seasons. So for that reason, you know, like you said, man, these contract numbers can be really deceiving in football. Like, it's all about the fine print. You know what I mean? That's really all it's about. And so for a lot of teams, if they had to fork out $180 million, like my dad texted me and he goes, I really wanted Kirk. And I was like, man, not for that money. Give me Russ on a $1 million deal all day long. For a lot of teams, I would say I would not have paid Kirk Cousins. But Atlanta is really the one exception, because I think Atlanta is freaking loaded, man. Like, all they've needed for 3 seasons, it's felt like, is a quarterback. And they have been building up. Like, last year, we agreed, Carson. You picked Atlanta to win the NFC South, correct? Or did you pick New Orleans?
I might have picked New Orleans, but Atlanta was definitely in my top 2.
And, you know, that was the consensus, is we just went, oh, my God, I mean, Atlanta is so talented. Like, even with average QB play, they're going to win this division, right? And I still feel the same way. Like, Atlanta is exceptionally talented. From the offensive line to the running game to the weapons. This is the one spot where I say, yeah, you made the right decision by paying Kirk, because they have a defense that is ready to contend. They have an offensive line that is ready to contend. They have a rock-solid running game, and they've got great weapons. At the end of the day, this is still Kirk Cousins. I know what Kirk Cousins is. He's mid-plus, but Kirk is so much better than Desmond Ridder, and he is so much better than Taylor Heineke that I think it's worth it. You know, again, I don't think Kirk's not Matt Stafford to me. Kirk is in that Dak tier, very much so. Kirk is in the Jared Goff. You know, he's in that range of guys. And you can win a lot of games with those guys. Jared Goff just went to an NFC title game. So I think Atlanta is probably, I don't know, it's tricky with Tampa Bay. And again, we got to see the draft. We need to evaluate all the free agency. Again, everything really matters in football. That's what's so interesting. There's so many moving parts, so many players. Atlanta's probably my favorite to win the NFC South right now, because that team is just so talented. Tampa Bay lost Dave Canales, and so I think it's great that they brought back Baker and Mike Evans. I think it was imperative to their offseason, but he was huge in drawing up easy stuff for Tampa Bay. And because of that loss, and because of how much I believe in the overwhelming talent in Atlanta, coupled with Kirk coming into town, yeah, man, I think Atlanta probably wins double-digit games and runs away with that division.
They absolutely should. If they don't, it's a flop. And I do just want to give credit to Kirk, man. I know you call him mid-plus. You used to call him the equator. He is comfortably north of the equator. The guy is really, really good. There's no doubt to me that he's closer to top 10 than he is to 15, 16, right in that average range. Like, he was playing some truly awesome football before he got hurt this year. He was leading the league in passing yards. He was just carrying an absurd load for that offense. Of course, he had Jettas, but I mean, he was thriving regardless of who he was throwing the football to. And even in the stretch where Jettas was hurt, he was killing it. And I just think he is one of the most poised pocket passers in the NFL, and that is still very valuable when you're doing it at the level that he is. No, he's not elite, as some Vikings fans would like to lead you to believe in recent years, and maybe even his raw statistical production would say, because of the lack of out-of-structure creation, but he's really, really good. And Atlanta has been really, really exceptionally bad at quarterback in recent years. So they have, without a question, the talent. I think if you look at the offensive skill position talent, if you look at the trenches, they have a whole lot to work with. Defensively, we know that especially in that back end, I mean, they've just got a lot of talented dudes. And I think long term, they are much better off using that 8th pick this year on an elite position player, ideally an edge, I would say, because if there's one spot you look at on the defensive side of the ball and it's like you would like to get a game wrecker, that's the most valuable position, point blank. But Atlanta's pass rush was pretty average. I think that would be a great spot to get a game-breaking talent. Much better than going for the 4th best quarterback in this draft, like J.J. McCarthy, which was strongly rumored. And if they hadn't gotten someone in free agency, maybe they would have had to do. I'm just not sold on him. And if you end up going with the wrong guy, again, it just sets you back a couple years. So Kirk should lead them to a couple straight division titles at the very least. I mean, in terms of talent, they are head and shoulders above the rest of the NFC South. And now in terms of quarterback play, they are head and shoulders above the rest of the NFC South. The tough part is kind of what we've inevitably seen with the Kirk Cousins experience in recent years, which is that he's really good. You're going to be quite good with him if you do a competent job building around him, but you're probably not going to have a Super Bowl window. And so you may look at this 4 or 5 year stretch and say, Kirk, you were really good. We won a good number of games, but ultimately we didn't get over the top. You think Atlanta has that kind of talent?
Hear me out. I mean, I think that the Steelers don't have a Super Bowl window because like 7 of the 8 best quarterbacks are in the AFC, right?
Yeah, NFC is much more open. That's true.
That's the one reason I'd say that Atlanta might have a shot here is because when you look at the QB discrepancy between them, I mean, Kirk might be, I mean, is he like a top 3 QB in the NFC? I mean, I'd probably take Stafford. I don't know.
Would you take Jordan Love?
Yeah.
Would you take Jared Goff? I would not take Goff over Kirk.
I like Goff a lot. That's
what
really
about
close.
Dak? He's the other one who I think you got to throw in that range. You would take Kirk over Dak?
Give me Kirk.
Well,
I also think it's
you are off Dak. I would
off
take Dak over Kirk.
I really like Raheem Morris stepping in as the head coach here for Atlanta. Every player that has ever talked about him speaks glowingly about Raheem, and I also just think it's hilarious, Carson, that Kirk Cousins is going to play in Atlanta, man.
I know.
That's such a funny thought.
Kirk
to me.
O'Chains.
Dude, 10 miles away from the nearest Coles, man. Let's do this, Kirk.
I think Atlanta is going to be really, really good. And maybe in the NFC, it does come down to if you get a favorable draw, can you knock off the Niners in a one-game scenario? I still don't think they are as stacked in terms of talent as Dallas, definitely not as San Francisco. And if Philly can figure things out defensively, but they're in that next tier for sure, and they could compete with those teams outside of San Francisco if they can maintain the level that they were at this past year. So I like it. I like it because it makes them a serious playoff team in a division that has no other serious playoff teams. And just winning your division, that's valuable. That's a great place to be in the NFL. And it does give you a puncher's chance. You're at least consistently in the playoffs hosting games. It makes your path easier. But I'm not super optimistic on this ending with us being like, all right, well, Atlanta like completely changed their outlook. The Kirk Cousins era was a huge success. I just think it's more likely that it ends as it did in Washington and as it did in Minnesota, where you're like, he was good, we're ready to move on. And I'm a little bit more nervous about the money here because he's 35 years old coming off a season-ending injury, and I get that he's not dependent on his athleticism and his mobility like a lot of other guys are, and quarterback longevity is ridiculous right now. And with his play style, he could be who he is at 39. It's possible, but generally, even when we've seen the Phillip Rivers, the Matt Ryans, like once you get to that 38, 39 range, guys who aren't dependent on their athleticism, who are a lot like Kirk in that sense, they're still fine. They're not guys you would want to be paying $45 million. So I worry a little bit about this contract aging poorly. But overall, I think I like it. I definitely like the sentiment. It's just the length in the dollar value. 4 years is probably what you had to give him just because of the competitive marketplace. But for Atlanta, where they have this young and up and coming, yet still win now because they're that talented kind of core, I just worry that in those last couple years of the contract, it could set them back where they're like, all right, we're ready to move on from Kirk now, and we're still dealing with this big old contract. Okay, Logan, you mentioned Derrick Henry earlier in the episode, getting signed for just 2 years, $16 million to the Baltimore Ravens, now in your division. How much does this matter to you?
It's fucking over. It's fucking over, man. Oh
It's
my
Jover.
God.
It's Jover.
The Ravens might have just become if it wasn't for Patrick Mahomes and Chris Jones existing, the Ravens might be my Super Bowl front runner. They are definitely 2 for me. And wow, maybe this will get Todd Monken to run the ball.
Maybe.
What a concept. That's the bottom line to me. It's like if the Ravens had a different game plan against Kansas City, maybe they win that football game. I think that Monken crapped his pants in that game and had a horrible game plan. You're the best rushing team in football. Now you have no option. If Derrick Henry and Lamar are out there, you're feeding him. And it just...
Yeah.
Carson, I would hate to be a defender on that field. Think about how much that is going to stress the brains of defensive ends and outside linebackers trying to run a read option against Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. It's wraps, dude. It doesn't matter. I'm trying to think about, Carson, this is the best quarterback and running back duo since who? I mean...
That's a good question.
Peyton and Edgerrin James? This is...
Ooh, wow. That's high. I was thinking Ben and Le'Veon was what came to my mind.
That's a good pick, too, but it's this is a generational Hall of Fame duo that is pairing up here with an elite offensive line, with elite skill talent. I mean, I'm petrified as a Steelers fan.
Yeah.
Now we got to go through the Browns, who have a great defense. We got to go through the Bengals with Joe Shiesty and all of their weapons. And now we got to play Lamar and Derrick Henry. The AFC North is going to be cutthroat, and the Ravens are heading the charge to me, man. You have taken now Lamar Jackson that has taken legitimate growth as a pocket passer, as a playmaker, and you have given him, I don't care, you can look at his number. It's Derrick Henry, man. He's still a tank.
Yeah.
I don't care if he's taken a step back over the past couple. It's Derrick Henry, man. And I can't think of a more Baltimore Raven player than Derrick Henry. He fits like a glove, man. I'm scared. I'm really scared. I think the Ravens might win 15, 16 games next year. This is one of the greatest quarterback and running back duos I think you could conceive of.
Even losing Patrick Queen, even losing Geno Stone, this is still an exceptionally loaded team. We saw defensively where they were consistently up there for the best in football, and they were top 5 offense, and now this is the best weapon. This is the best offensive skill position player that Lamar has had, period. Shout out Mark Andrews. And of course, Derrick Henry isn't what he was in 2020 when he's having a historic record-setting kind of season. I mean, the pace that he was on was just absurd. The efficiency and volume, it's all-time stuff. It's something we haven't seen from a running back in a long, long time, but he's still unquestionably top 5. Maybe he's not as efficient, as consistent, but that's also in a way harder situation in Tennessee, where it is still Derrick Henry is going to be the offense, with the exception of a couple really fun Will Levis to D-Hop games. Defenses know who the threat is, and they're able to load up those boxes, and he is so exceptionally physical. He is just that one-of-one kind of tank that he is still able to find success. Now he's going to be in an ideal offensive situation where not only is he playing with an elite quarterback who is going to constantly stress defenses as a runner, who has improved weapons, it's just an overall great offensive situation. He doesn't have to carry the same sort of burden as a number 1 running back, in my opinion, because we have seen Baltimore produce these number 1 rushing attacks because they have Lamar. Even last year with Lamar taking a step back in terms of volume, they're the best rushing attack in football. Gus Edwards has consistently carried them in those short down situations and just been really productive overall. The vision was there with J.K. Dobbins. He can't stay healthy. It still doesn't matter. Baltimore is going to be the best rushing attack in football, basically no matter who they put out there at running back. Now you're putting a top 5 running back out there, and I just think it makes them overwhelming. And I do think you hit on a key point. The concern with Baltimore consistently has been in these playoff environments, can they compete through the air against these elite AFC passing attacks, against the great pure passers that are Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen and whatnot? And I thought Lamar was really improved as a pure passer, and I thought he can go toe-to-toe in these battles, and he didn't really have that much of a chance. Well, in the sense that they kept on getting behind the sticks. It just was a bad game plan. Lamar wasn't good against the Chiefs, but they did not set him up to succeed. now you are going to have just this incredible balance. And if you don't run the football down people's throats, it's really inexcusable. It was already stupid. It would be inexcusable when you have Derrick Henry back there. And it's what you said. That's just a nightmare for any defense to prepare for. They were the most talented team in the AFC last year with the MVP of the league. They remain the most talented team in the AFC, and they still have the MVP of the league and undeniably a top 5 quarterback, whether you have him at 2 or whether you have him at 5. That's a team that very well should maybe be the Super Bowl frontrunner. They have to be in that tier 1 of contenders.
Well, I just think it changes so many dynamics. You think about different scenarios in football games. Like I said, anytime when you were running a play-action fake or you're running an option play with Henry or Lamar, pick your poison. Pick how you're going to die. Am I going to go after Lamar? Am I going to go after Derrick Henry? Well, we screwed up. Or in red zone situations, running a play action with Derrick Henry and it just leaves Mark Andrews wide open. Like you said the key word, Carson, overwhelming. Right now, like I think Kansas City, has a good recipe to combat Baltimore. Chris Jones in the middle, great linebackers, genius defensive schemer and Spags, great defensive talent. But I don't know if I can pick against Baltimore, man. I mean, this is I'm scared. I'm scared, dude. The Ravens, I don't know, dude. This is a game-changing maneuver. We're going to do, a couple months as we get into football season, we'll do predictions and previews and stuff. Right now, I think I'm going to take the Ravens to win the Super Bowl.
Boy, it's tough because I did take the Ravens to win the Super Bowl before the playoffs, and then a little fella named Patrick Mahomes came along and beat them. Although it really wasn't about Mahomes. We know it was about that Chiefs defense and it was about the Ravens offensive struggles. But God, it just is so scary to pick against him. But on paper, there's no question, right? They are obscenely stacked.
And again, we can talk about how they lost. The specifics of that game. I've never seen 2 turnovers in the end zone in my life in a single game. And the fact that one gets poked out at the goal line and the other is Lamar throwing one of the dumbest passes I've ever seen. It's like the Ravens weren't that far off from beating Kansas City without Derrick Henry. And now you've added Derrick Henry to the fold. And as a fan, as just a football fan, I am really excited to see this duo together. As a Steelers fan, I'm a little scared.
And the other thing, dude, is the value here is awesome. Obviously, one of the main talking points throughout last offseason was the devaluing of running backs. Derrick Henry not getting a contract at that time. Dalvin Cook, Josh Jacobs. And this is a figure that I am very comfortable with because this is an offseason where a lot of running backs have gotten paid because it's not a running back draft that people are very fond of. And when I see 2 years, $16 million for Derrick Henry, and you're committing longer term and more value per year to other guys who I don't think are as good, I get the concern that he is a 30-year-old running back with a lot of tread on his tires, and the track record with that is horrible. And he has regressed. But he hasn't regressed by enough to where I'm like, I wouldn't give Derrick Henry 2 years, $16 million. It's a short-term deal. It's a very reasonable cap hit per year. I love it for Baltimore. I think they're one of those teams that is in a position to pay a running back at all. Yeah. Again, it's not an overwhelming amount, but if you're going to invest in that position, it should be, we are loaded, and if we can add another star-level player, forget positional value, we just want more stars because that might be the thing that puts us over the top, and that's exactly where Baltimore is. They were already stacked. Now they're bordering on like overwhelmingly stacked. So I really, really like it for them. The other biggest running back signing was the Eagles poaching Saquon Barkley from the New York Giants. Maybe poaching isn't the right word. I don't think that they were going to pay him, but nevertheless, taking him from a division rival, 3 years, $38 million is the number there. So a good bit bigger than what Derrick Henry's getting. How do you like this for Philly as they try to bounce back from a very disappointing, ugly close to last year?
I mean, it's huge to me. I think he's a massive upgrade from the running backs they had last season, and it gives them a clear focus on what they need to do in the draft. I think Philadelphia's number one priority should be getting a guy in the first round to replace Jason Kelce, and there's a lot of interior talent that I like. Now, I hope this guy doesn't go to Philly because I want him in Pittsburgh. Jackson Powers-Johnson out of Oregon. I love that kid. I think he is a stud. I think he is immediately going to anchor the interior of an offensive line. So that's my marquee guy. I think that should be the focus for Philly. You got the running back. You have most of the other offensive line pieces still in play. Mailata, Dickerson, Lane Johnson, right? get a center in the first round or get a right guard in the first round and go to work, fill out the rest of the line, and get back to your identity. And it's really similar to the Lamar Derrick Henry thing. It's like, good God, man, now we got to cover Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley. Like, I would change if you can get that investment in the offensive line. That would be the dynamic that I lean into if I'm Philadelphia. We are going to, you have these overwhelming weapons on the outside, Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown, but it's like, the identity of our football team should be running it through Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley. My one concern with Saquon is definitely just injuries, all the stuff that Saquon has taken, but he's still uber talented. He is a home run hitter. And two more things on how this affects the Giants. One, I think the fact that Tiki Barber came out and said, "You're dead to me," is coming from Tiki Barber. That's the funniest quote I've ever heard in football media. Tiki, you've been dead to Giants fans since 2005. What are you talking about? They hate you. I don't know what Tiki's talking about.
Do Giants fans hate Tiki?
Giants fans, Tiki is hated by New York fans. People.
Interesting.
No, man. I mean, he quit on them. Like, Giants fans have no love for Tiki Barber, so I find it incredibly ironic that he's saying that Saquon's dead to him. The Giants are going to have the worst offense in the NFL next season. I mean, it is going to be putrid. It is going to be a very, very stinky product. Brian Dable is going to get fired. They're probably going to win 5 games. The defense is going to be sick, but that offense is going to be the worst in the league.
Yeah, they were already in some really ugly territory. What we saw from them and the Pats and the Jets, like, we talked about it throughout the year. It was a level of offensive production in the wrong direction that we hadn't seen in more than a decade. So they're definitely not helping their situation there by getting rid of clearly their best player offensively. For Philly, I have mixed feelings about this. I think Saquon is obviously a stud, and I think that even if his efficiency numbers and some of his raw production, mostly just because he hasn't been healthy over the last few years, don't reflect his just raw ability as a football player, you have to consider situation and how brutal it is there. And Philly is another one of those teams like Baltimore where you can argue they're in a spot where it's okay, we're loaded, and now let's just get another star. Forget positional value. We want another star player on our football team. I understand all that. My feelings about them investing this sort of money in Saquon is probably going to depend on how they rebuild this defense, the sort of value moves that they're able to make. And maybe rebuild is a strong word because I think that front is so damn good. But when you're talking about a decimated linebacker core and an aging secondary that just wasn't good enough, we saw throughout this year, we kept holding out hope that this Eagles defense that had a historic pass rush in 2022, at some point on the back of that, getting arguably even more loaded, would turn the corner, and they just never did. They were the number 30 scoring defense. They could not get stops ever when it mattered, and obviously Hurts had a rough year. A lot of things went wrong for Philly. They were not well coached. It was just a shocking sort of worst-case scenario for this football team overall. But I do think Hurts, even if he maybe isn't as good as some people felt after that 2022 season, even if he's not a top 5 kind of quarterback, I think he's better than he showed last year. I think he'll be more comfortable now another year into just his experience as a starting quarterback, getting more used to teams, throwing more zone looks, trying to take away some of the explosive stuff that he was hitting in 2022. I think he'll have something of a bounce back year. He still has awesome weapons. Now he has an awesome running back. This Philly offense should be great, and that pass rush is great. So it's going to be about the draft. I think that they do have to address the interior line with Kelsey retiring, but a lot of it is about the back end of that defense. They are inarguably, though, in position to be a contender again this year. I worry about Sirianni a bit as head coach, but they have the talent. They have the talent if they make the right moves outside of this Saquon deal. And if they do, then this is just another star football player on their team where maybe it's a little bit much and I'm a little bit worried about injuries, just Saquon often being banged up and whatnot, but it's definitely high upside.
Yeah, and I do think they asked Hurts to do a lot last season. And for a while, the first 8 weeks, you remember, they're putting up 35 pieces. They're eking out wins against Washington, against, bummy teams, and they just it was a lot on the shoulders of Jalen Hurts. And you think about what he had to do during the Super Bowl run. It was a run-first offense. They got more push than anybody in the league. They abused the tush push. And because of how loaded these boxes were, that's what I think Saquon does for this team. It weaponizes. It's going to force defenses to put more guys at the line of scrimmage like they had in their Super Bowl season. And it's going to, on the outside, it's going to open up way more one-on-one opportunities for Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. And I know everybody's high on A.J. Brown. I think Devontae Smith is better than him. And I think the Eagles have 2 number 1 receivers. That's not a disrespectful thing to A.J. I think both of those guys are number 1s. And so I think Saquon just opens up more for this offense. I think it's going to be – I think you're right. The Eagles getting over the hump and winning way more football games is going to have to do way more with how they invest into the linebacking core and the secondary. But I think their offense is going to be really similar to their Super Bowl run when they are completely maximizing their guys on the outside because they're going to get one-on-one coverages, because there's going to be stacked boxes, because you have to compensate. You got one of the best scrambling quarterbacks in the NFL and one of the most dynamic rushers in the NFL in the backfield with what is still a very good offensive line. So I think it's going to open up a lot for Philly offensively. I think you're right, maybe a little bit of an overpay, but this is still a worthwhile signing to me.
Yeah, and when you consider that their running game took a step back last year, but still how effective it was with DeAndre Swift being your RB1, like Saquon is going to thrive, man. Saquon's efficiency is going to take a huge step up, and I could see like an all-pro sort of comeback for him. He's just going to be in such a superior situation. I do disagree on the Devontae over AJ take.
Really?
I think if you're thinking about just like pure receiver traits, route running, hands, all that stuff, yeah, Devontae definitely is better. He's the more polished receiver. But AJ is just such a physical freak that I think that it offsets that. AJ's ridiculous. I mean, the stretch that he had, all of the 125-plus yard games in a row, he's a monster, man. But they do have 2 number 1s. They have 2 of the top 15 receivers in football with, no matter what, I mean, a top half quarterback and now a top 10 running back. They should be really, really, really good. You mentioned, though, the Giants now looking at a post-Saquon world. Their big move was trading for Brian Burns. They gave up a 2nd and a 5th and give him a 5-year, $150 million deal. What did you think about this for New York?
Yeah, I like the move. Again, it's really good value for a guy like Brian Burns, and I think they legitimately have 2 number 1 edge rushers. That's super valuable, getting pressure on the quarterback, pairing Brian Burns up with Kayvon Thibodeau. And I think this defense is going to be excellent next season, Carson. You still have big Dexter Lawrence in the middle. You got Bobby Okereke holding down the middle, and then you got Adoree Jackson and Deonte Banks. Like, you look at the totality of this defense, and they are uber talented. Unfortunately for the New York Giants, it's not going to matter because they have Daniel Jones at quarterback, and they have nothing. This is going to be a colossal disaster for New York. Credit to the defense. The defense is going to be great. The offense is going to suck, and Brian Dable is going to get fired. This is a dumpster fire waiting to happen. And another dumpster fire. Shout out to the Carolina Panthers. Look, Carson, I just want to talk to the GM or the owner of the Panthers really quick. He's not going to see this, but
No, he will.
If anybody offers you 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick for a player, unless that player is like...
All right, Logan, I'm giving you 2 firsts and a second for TJ Watt.
Well, that's not happening because TJ Watt's the best player on planet Earth. That's the one scenario where it wouldn't happen.
Bro hasn't even heard of Josh Allen.
But it's like for most players, I'm doing that in a heartbeat. I'm not thinking. So the Panthers completely gaffed that, the fact that they go from 2 firsts and a second midseason from LA to a 2nd and a 5th. Great job, David Tepper. Just another great move in the long line of great moves you've made. Yeah, the Giants' defense is going to be great next season, but it's not going to matter because their offense is going to suck. I think they're probably going to be the worst. No, the Commanders still exist. They'll be the 2nd worst team in the NFC East.
Yeah, that's a real race to the bottom, man. There's no question that the Panthers bungled this just with where they are at as a franchise. And obviously, it's not like Brian Burns is some guy on the decline whatsoever. He's 25. Like, he is very much at his peak. But just, they're so far away. And the opportunity to gain that sort of assets to
and the fact that you gave up so much to go out and get Bryce Young, you got to get back out in the first round this year, man.
I totally agree. So there's no question that they missed the window to make the most And Brian Burns is really good, but if you
Yeah.
got 2 firsts and a second for him, I mean, that would have been a home run. Like, there's no situation in which you're not happy with that. For the Giants, you have an awesome defense. You have a really, really awesome front. But it's like you said, I'm just not sure what it does. Like, you're awful offensively. And unfortunately, they're tied up with Danny Dimes, who's just not good. And feels like they are headed towards a pretty hard reset. It's just tough to be really optimistic about any team that is so far away at quarterback when it's like, yeah, you netted a great player and you did it for good value in terms of the trade. The contract is steep, but that's like the going rate of an edge of Brian Burns' caliber, who's just in the heart of his prime. But it's like, are you in a position to be saying, all right, our move is to get this star win now edge? I can't say it's a bad move because it's a really, really good football player, but I'm just not sure that it moves the needle. And I think that maybe you'd be better off trying to make splashy moves for a true number one receiver, trying to do something offensively to at least make yourself competent there. It's really tough if you don't have the answer at quarterback no matter what, but we know that you're not going anywhere with the number 30 offense or the number 32 offense, no matter how good your defense is. So a little bit of a strange exchange overall there. We got another edge on the move, though, unfortunately being snatched away from my Buffalo Bills, who really didn't have any chance to retain him. But the Niners signed Leonard Floyd for 2 years, $24 million. This is considering that they're going to have to let Chase Young walk, just not going to be able to pay him whatever he's going to demand. What do you think about that for the Niners?
It's a good pickup. I mean, Floyd's just good depth. It is a big loss for Buffalo. He was really good last year. I believe they're going to lose Eric Armstead as well. I've heard that they're going to release him. They couldn't get a figure done. Those are 2 big blows, man. I don't want to act like they're not. Armstead is probably the most underrated defensive lineman on San Francisco. You know, all the shine goes to Bosa. All the shine went to Chase Young. Who was the guy that we used to have? Hargrave too got a lot of love, and Armstead's an anchor. So those are big losses. Floyd's a good replacement. He's solid, and I like the versatility too because you can slide Floyd in. Like hypothetically, say that the Niners want to go out and get like another really big boy for the edge. You can slide Floyd to outside linebacker. It gives them a little positional versatility that I like. If you want to put Dre Greenlaw on one side for coverage, you put Floyd on the other for pass rush. You know, he's just a good player to add to an already really stacked defense, a great defensive culture, and it's not a lot of money. Considering you're going to lose Chase Young, and, you know, Chase Young wasn't great in San Francisco. You know what I mean? If Chase Young is asking for, I don't know what his going price is, if he's asking for more than 15 to 20 million a year, this is a good value deal. Leonard Floyd was awesome last year in Buffalo. So I think it's good value for a team that needed the guy at the position. And yeah, if Chase is asking for 20 plus million a year, I'm not paying him that. His tape hasn't suggested that he's worth that. So I think this is a good move for San Francisco. But they needed it, man. They're losing a lot of guys up front.
I like it. Leonard Floyd, I mean, the guy gets home. He makes plays. He is just a consistently productive player in terms of sacks. He's got speed off the edge. And the Bills' defensive front was really good. I wouldn't say that he was the best overall player, but in terms of just pure pass rushing, getting home to the quarterback, he definitely made a strong case. And San Francisco, they are trying to maintain this absurd talent level, and they're going to have to do so making moves that aren't necessarily as splashy, right? You're not going to be able to just outright sign absolute studs every single year. And we've seen them have to let some great defensive players go. DeForest Buckner a few years ago. This year, it does look like it's going to be Eric Armstead. They still have so many dudes up front, though, with Bosa and Hargrave, and now bringing in Floyd. And we know an absurd linebacker duo. Like, the Niners are going to be in the thick of things. And I think this is a good reload move for them at a pretty reasonable figure. I mean, you're paying for a good edge rusher, like definitely one of those, I would say probably third tier guys, and it's not going to break the bank because you don't need to do that when you already have Nick Bosa as an obvious number one. Hey, North Carolina residents, DraftKings is officially live in your state, and the thrill and excitement of March Mania is here. And DraftKings Sportsbook, one of America's top-rated sportsbook apps, is giving new customers a shot to turn $5 into $150 instantly in bonus bets with any college basketball bet.
Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code NERDS. New customers can bet $5 to get $150 instantly in bonus bets. Only at DraftKings Sportsbook with code NERDS. The crown is yours.
Another guy who is leaving Buffalo, Gabe Davis, signed away by the Jacksonville Jaguars for 3 years, $39 million. How did you feel about that, Logan?
Dude, there's just something about the Jaguars going out and signing mid-receivers, man. Can we actually...
They live for it.
Hey, Jacksonville, could we get Trevor Lawrence some actual help? Could you guys maybe put together a draft, a package with some draft picks and go out and trade for a number one receiver? No, let's get Christian Kirk. Let's get Zay Jones.
Well,
let's get Evan Ingram. Christian Kirk's cool.
Kirk's pretty darn good. But yeah, he's not a
Ridley.
true
It's
number one.
It's like, what does Gabe Davis do for you, man? He sucks. It's gonna be so funny to me, man, because it's like Trevor Lawrence is gonna have another mid-year because he's trying to elevate an offense that completely sucks by himself, and then everybody's gonna go, oh, Trevor Lawrence had help this year. They went out and got Gabe Davis. He was a great number 2 for Buffalo, and it's like, no, guys, Gabe Davis actually sucks. They paid him way too much money. He stinks at football. He doesn't have good hands. He's not a great route runner. Gabe Davis just stinks. And, yeah, man, I just think the discourse after the season is going to be really funny when the Jaguars are a league average offense. Trevor doesn't have a great year, and it's like, wow, I would never have guessed. You gave him a mediocre offensive line, a mediocre running game, and mediocre receivers. Shocker. The offense is mediocre. I want Trevor Lawrence to actually get some help. And they got Gabe Davis. That's the exact opposite of help. I think this is one of the biggest whiffs in free agency.
Listen, I don't like Gabe Davis whatsoever. My final perspective on this signing is going to depend on whether or not they're able to bring Calvin Ridley back, because it kind of seemed like bringing in Gabe Davis, that was not going to happen. But the reporting is that Ridley wants to return to Jacksonville and that the market maybe isn't super hot for him. If Gabe Davis is your wide receiver 3, I don't love dedicating $13 million to him. I don't think he's a particularly good wide receiver 3 even, but it's better than saying we would rather have this guy as our wide receiver 2 when we want to let Calvin Ridley walk, because Calvin Ridley is just way better. And Gabe Davis's numbers are 1,000% inflated by playing with Josh Allen. You laid out the flaws. You can get some chunk plays with Gabe, but in terms of down-to-down production, he is so inconsistent. I mean, there were so many games down the stretch of this year where Gabe Davis just downright disappeared. And when you did give him an opportunity to make a play, he dropped the ball. He has really bad hands. He is exceptionally lacking in polish as a route runner. He doesn't have that sort of short field quickness. He's just not as good as he's been hyped up to be, and we've harped on that over and over again. And by the end of this year, it was like Khalil Shakir is way, way better than Gabe Davis. And a lot of people had probably never heard of Khalil Shakir coming into this year. So I thought that Gabe might get paid more somewhere. I thought he might get $18 million a year. I thought somebody might really trick themselves into the Gabe Davis experience, and I'm glad to see that that didn't happen. I tweeted out that he was robbing the Jags blind and a silly little picture of Scrooge McDuck. I'm joking a little bit. It's not that $13 million is a crazy figure. It's just I wouldn't pay Gabe Davis $13 million. I wouldn't want to invest in him as a key member of my offense, because I just don't think he's that good fundamentally. And I think a guy like Calvin Ridley is much better, a much better down-to-down receiver. So I don't like that for Jacksonville. And then the other move the Jags make is trading for Mac Jones, obviously to be their backup. But what do you think about that?
Exceptional value for a guy like Mac. Mac's not a starter in this league, I don't think.
McCorkle.
You got a former first-round pick for a sixth-round pick, and man, I think Mac just needed a fresh start. I have my issues with Mac. I know a lot of people talked about his immaturity, his lack of composure as a young quarterback. I've heard that a lot. The one thing I'd say, he played at Alabama. He had a good offensive system at Alabama, and he had smart offensive minds around him at Alabama. I can understand a young guy getting frustrated when he comes to the NFL and he comes to a completely incompetent offense that doesn't know what they're doing. So I can sympathize with Mac Jones' situation a little bit. You gave him, he goes from having the best coordinators, brilliant offensive minds, and exceptional skill position talent to one of the most abysmal offensive situations in football. So I can sympathize.
Not when he was a rookie, though. Not when he was a rookie. And they carried him.
I can sympathize a little bit with his situation and his frustrations, but I think he needed a fresh start. And I mean, I feel like Mac Jones is probably, as good as a backup as you can get, man. It's not a crazy move, but for a former first-round pick for a sixth, I don't think it's a bad move.
They called him Baby Brady. They told me I was wrong when I said he was not.
You were early to that, exactly, man. You were early to that.
When I said he's not that guy, basically. Yeah, if you want McCorkle to be your backup, that's fine. It's not exactly a needle mover. Giving up a sixth, it's kind of whatever. I mean, if you were going to draft a sixth-round quarterback, he probably wouldn't be as capable as Mac. And maybe you're a little bit more comfortable with him starting a game or two, so like T-Law doesn't have to play through injury as we've seen him try to do, and maybe the results from him aren't as good because he's banged up. But Mac is far from good, obviously. The decision-making this year was awful. His pocket presence, he gets the jitters. He's a very mediocre arm talent. He is a below-average athlete. Like, there's no trait that he has at a positive level if you're considering him a starter, but if you're considering him a backup, then it's fine. I do want to touch on, quickly, the Bills situation, because we did mention Leonard Floyd is now gone, Gabe Davis is now gone, and there has really been kind of an exodus of some of the old established vets with the team. Bye-bye Jordan Poyer, bye-bye Trey White, bye-bye Mitch Morse, all of those decisions made by the Bills. They do retain Epinesa and Daquan Jones and Deion Dawkins, and as I mentioned, they restructured Josh's contract to clear up a little bit of cap. I've seen some people asking me about this. I've seen some people viewing this as like a sign that the Bills are going into a rebuild, but this is exactly what they had to do. You're never going to rebuild when you have Josh Allen. You're just going to retool. You're going to reload, and when you are talking about shedding some of the aging players on this team, guys like Trey White, who, as much as I love him, I have a Trey White jersey, now coming off of a second major injury. I mean, all of the injury issues that he's had, I just don't think that you're going to invest in him at this point when he's knocking on the door of 30. We talked about how Poyer had regressed a little bit. So I like it, especially because we've seen how effectively the Bills can find and plug and play these DBs, man. If it's Christian Benford, if it's Taron Johnson, all-pro Taron Johnson, if it's even a Dane Jackson, like, they just find dudes on the margins who can produce, and I want to get younger. I want to get healthier. I want to be less dependent on these aging guys who are a bit over the hump and who are prone to getting a little bit more banged up. I like it. I think that it is absolutely the right direction for this team to take, and I like the guys who they prioritize. Like, maybe Leonard Floyd outproduced AJ Epinesa in terms of raw sack total. If you were choosing between one or the other, there's no question I would take Epi every day of the week. I think that he's a significantly more impactful run defender. He is very much trending upwards, whereas Leonard Floyd is, not trending upwards at the very least, and probably slightly trending downwards. Deion, you had to pay. Daquan Jones, just an absolute stud this year. I think still a good value signing. So I like what the Bills have done, even as some of these big names are leaving. How have you felt about their offseason?
I think it's really encouraging that without a lot of these guys last season, with all these injuries that they sustained, that they were still a good defense. And so that's why I think you can sacrifice some of these guys. If it is Trey, if it is Micah, if it's Poyer, they're aging, they're getting older. It's time to let them go. And Trey is a sad case because when Trey was at his best and at his game, he was one of the game's best corners. It's sad. I know that a lot of fans in Buffalo love the guy, but the NFL's a business. You know what I mean? And they can't make decisions based on heart. I'm sure a lot of people in Buffalo love Trey, but it's just time, man. You're not going to pay a corner that old that's already sustained a lot of injuries. And you don't want to, more importantly, you don't want to pay a guy that has this injury history and potentially misses more season. You just don't want to have your money tied up in that. I think it's a good move for Buffalo, and rebuilding is a dumb word. The Bills are
Yeah.
contenders. Anytime Josh Allen is on the field, the Bills are contenders. And like I said, man, their defense was great with 4-stringers and 5th-stringers out there,
Yeah.
man. I think that if McDermott can do that, we give McDermott a lot of flack. The one thing he's shown is that despite injuries, they can find talent and they can plug and play guys really effectively. Like, I thought that was going to be a major hindrance to the Bills' season last season, and it wasn't. The defense was a strength of this team. So I think it's the right move by Buffalo, and it's a new era, but I think they're going to be better next year.
I do too. And that's the thing, dude. Like, when you think about everything that went wrong with the Bills, all of the head-scratching losses, all of the mind-blowing losses, the decimations to this defense in terms of health, they were still right in it. And they played Kansas City as close as anybody. Like, that's just the reality when you have Josh Allen. And I still think you're going to be looking definitely at a defense-heavy draft in terms of retooling. But first round, I still think they can go wide receiver.
Well, I was going to ask, what do you think are the biggest needs for the Bills this offseason?
Well, I think that, first of all, we're probably going to have to go interior line to replace Mitch Morse. I think that as much as I like Khalil Shakir and as much as Josh Allen is going to produce regardless of who's out there at receiver, you need another dynamic talent alongside Stephon Diggs, because we just saw that being singularly reliant on those two wasn't the best for this offense, and down the stretch, Diggs was no longer producing at the level of like the elite number one that he has been. So if it's Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU, if it's Mitchell out of Texas, I think you got to get one of those guys at 28.
Oh my
if
God,
you have to
Mitchell
trade up a
with
couple
Josh Allen.
spots. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, you just need to make life a little bit easier on Josh, even though this offense is great. And there's an argument that when you look at what a Patrick Mahomes has done, you are better off investing in the defense, making a truly elite defense, and then just giving him enough on offense. With how Diggs is trending, I would feel much more comfortable putting like another legit high-end receiver out there on the field with him. And then I do think overall in terms of the defense, it's really about adding depth. I feel pretty good about the starting situation, but obviously there are some veteran losses where you're going to have to draft for some depth on the back end, linebackers, a little bit up front as well. But I don't think that they really need to make a super splashy move defensively. I think getting younger and getting healthier and making those good value adds is kind of the formula for this offseason. Okay, we talked about a couple running backs getting paid. One of the more head-scratching moves, in my opinion, was the Packers both signing Josh Jacobs for 4 years, $48 million, and then releasing Aaron Jones. How did you feel about that for Green Bay?
Yeah, head-scratching is the right word. One, I didn't think Aaron Jones had fallen off that much. I thought that Aaron Jones
Jones down the stretch this year was amazing.
Yeah, I thought when he was on the field, it was like this looked like a different Packers offense. He's a really good rusher and receiver. He had 81 scrimmage yards a game, and I did the math on his career. From his rookie season to the last season that he's played, that is 1 yard below his career average for scrimmage yards per game, which means Aaron Jones is at or around where he is averagely. Like, he is still the same player. And I thought that was evident on tape. Just making big plays. And the fact that you trade out this guy that has been a Packers lifer that Packers fans love. They love Aaron Jones. And they go out and get a guy that literally had the biggest statistical drop-off from a rushing champ ever. In league history, Josh Jacobs had the biggest fall-off from being a league-leading rusher to the next season. I mean, it was ridiculous. 3.5 yards per carry, under 62 yards rushing per game. And don't get me wrong, like Jacobs isn't chopped liver. He's a good rusher and receiver too. And I think in a different situation, he could succeed. That's one thing I want to be clear about. The Raiders' offensive situation, their offensive line got zero push. There was nothing going on up there, but I don't know how you can't be concerned about that kind of drop in statistical production, especially when you just already have a guy on your team that is arguably as good as Jacobs. And maybe Jacobs is the better straight-up rusher, and you're hoping that, you know, your offensive line is going to be better than Vegas is, and you can set up more play-action stuff with Jordan Love. I don't know, Carson. To me, it was just really shocking because I thought Jones was legitimately good when he was on the field last year, and this felt excessive And it's not really that big of an upgrade to me. Jones to Jacobs isn't that big of a upgrade.
No.
Yeah, I'm really befuddled. This was probably the most confusing signing for me, free agency.
I don't like it at all. I understand that Josh Jacobs had a monster 2022 season, led the league in rushing, but Aaron Jones has been so good, and he is such a complete back. I think that, yes, he's valuable as a receiver, but, I mean, he's a really, really good pure rusher, and he carried the load for this offense in the playoffs. Like, yeah, Jordan Love was very good against the Cowboys and had some awesome moments, but, like, this was a team that established we are going to pound the ball on the ground and we're going to open up the play action off of that. And Aaron Jones was fantastic. I still think he's a great pure rusher of the football. And of course, Vegas is a bad situation, but Josh Jacobs just really struggled last year. And I thought even like when Zamir White was out on the field, like he looked more dynamic. He was more efficient. I'm not saying he's better than Josh Jacobs, but I don't know that that's the guy who I would give 4 years, $48 million to. Man. And I get the dynamic of, okay, Aaron Jones is 29 years old. Josh Jacobs is 26. And you want to just be completely free of any running back by the time that they hit 30.
Well, and that's the one area where I wonder if there's something going on behind the scenes with Jones that we don't know about. Like, is there a lingering injury that's holding on? Is he?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? This feels like there's something more to this deal.
Maybe. I just feel like the Packers have done a really good job deliberately of preserving Aaron Jones, of pairing him with Jamal Williams and then A.J. Dillon, just guys who we can legitimately share that load with. Like, Logan, Aaron Jones has more than 100 fewer carries in his NFL career than Josh Jacobs.
Wow.
So I just don't really see the tread on the tires point to where it would compel me to, hey, yeah, we'll give this guy big running back money and let a guy who has been, I would say, I mean, he was better last year. No question Aaron Jones was better. Let him go entirely. That just doesn't really make sense to me. Elsewhere in the NFC North, we have the Vikings making some moves. They signed Jonathan Grenard for 4 years, $76 million, and they do bring in Sam Darnold. The expectation, it seems now that Kirk is gone, is that they are going to trade up, and maybe they want to be the team that goes and gets J.J. McCarthy. But it's not like they're paying Darnold nothing. It's 1 year, $10 million, so I wouldn't be shocked if he's a bridge starter for them. What's your take on Minnesota and those couple moves?
Yeah, we'll start with quarterback really quick. I don't think Darnold's going to be the starter. I think they're paying him to be a backup. I think that's his role, or just a contingency plan to have in case something goes on during the draft. And I think
a half-year starter. I could definitely see him being a half-year starter. Week 8, you say, okay, we've had enough of Sam Darnold. Let's bring in JJ.
And it's kind of weird to me that people are penciling in JJ as the guy. I think Michael Penix is way more pro-ready and the better prospect immediately for a win-now team. That's what confuses me, is because the way my draft order would go, I would go Caleb, Drake May, and then I might go Michael Penix next over a Jaden Daniels, because there's Jaden, there's Bo Nix, there's J.J. McCarthy. Am I missing anybody?
No, those are all the real contenders.
Those are most of the top dogs. Penix would be my third guy off the board, so it's strange to me that
that's not going to happen. I mean,
it's not.
I respect your personal rankings, but
Jaden's going to be the third guy off.
And JJ. I mean, JJ is shooting up.
He's the athletic traits. Yeah. So I think all of these guys
top 10
are going to have chances to start. And so, Carson, I mean, I think guys late in the draft, like in that 20 to 32 range, I think 1 to 2 of those QBs is still going to be available for a team that wants to have that. So all the quarterbacks are on the table for me with Minnesota. Grenard is an interesting signing to me. He is my biggest red flag signing of the free agency period, and the only reason I say this, he had 12.5 sacks last season. It was a career year for Grenard. He was great. He's only got 23 sacks across 4 seasons, and so I'm just always weary of paying a guy who has one outlier campaign. It's a lot of money. It's a big contract. It's 4 years, $76 million, and I'm not trying to be overly critical, because if this works out, again, it's a star edge rushing duo, and that is invaluable in today's league. The fact that you can have Danielle Hunter, who that guy just beats time.
Well,
that
he might be gone.
And if Hunter goes...
In fact, the Texans are interested in him. They might do a swap.
That's so funny. Grenard is just a red flag to me in the sense that he had the benefit of playing alongside Will Anderson, who I think Will Anderson was better than him. I know the raw production numbers say that Grenard, but I think Will Anderson got a lot of attention. I think he was their best edge rusher. And so it's very similar to me like the Titans paying Bud Dupree. The edge rusher numbers don't always tell the truth. Bud Dupree got to play alongside TJ Watt. Guess who had double-digit sacks a few times because he played alongside TJ Watt? That's my one concern, is that a guy who had an outlier season gets his bag, and it's like, is he really that good, or is he the beneficiary of a great defensive system and playing alongside another great edge rusher? That being said, if they're able to retain Hunter and Grenard, and if this works out, I think the Vikings defense is one of the most primed to take a legitimate leap next season. Brian Flores, as the defensive coordinator, is a brilliant defensive mind. This was a really young defense that improved a lot as the season went on. They weren't great at the start of the year, but they got a lot better as the year went along. And so if this move works out, I think the Vikings could be a team that's primed to leap into the top 10 of defenses. They also get Andrew Van Ginkel. I like Harrison Phillips in the middle. I like some of their secondary. So Minnesota to me is if this move works out, Minnesota's a team that could be primed to take a major defensive leap next season.
And we should mention this morning they add Aaron Jones. So now he is staying in the division. He is going to be in Minnesota.
That's a huge get for them.
That is. Very, very good runner of the football. I like what Minnesota's doing. I agree with you on the Grenard point, and they're not paying him that tier 1 edge rusher money, but they're paying him that tier 2 edge rusher money. It is a big investment, and he definitely walked into a situation with a great defensive coach last year alongside another great edge rusher and had some outlier production within the scope of his career. But I do think that he's good. I do think it's a good position to invest in, especially if Hunter is gone. I'm not super high on Minnesota just because I think Kirk was really holding a lot of things together for them. And I think that just as a football team, they have a long ways to go.
Really? You don't think they're like talented enough off? I could see Minnesota eking out, somewhere between 7 to 10 wins next year.
Oh, well, I could see them getting to 7. They got to 7 this year. But if you're talking about making a playoff push, I don't love it. I still think the line needs work. I like bringing in Aaron Jones. That run game was just brutal last year. But this doesn't feel to me like a team that is in the mode of, all right, we're going to make a legit playoff push now. I still think, although that defense improved and I think is improving in this offseason, well, losing to Neil Hunter would be a pretty massive loss for them. It's not, to me, going to be climbing into that top 10 kind of range. I think they're just kind of having a mid-off with themselves. I think that they're going to be okay. It's really just going to be about, do they nail quarterback? And I don't think that they have to force it this year, but I think that they will because they have Justin Jefferson, and Justin Jefferson isn't going to want to be playing with Sam Darnold and have that be like the plan. It's just not going to work.
I do think their offense is really poised to take on a guy that can step in and just fill in. And if they get Michael Penix, who I think is ready, I think they're a fringe playoff contender. The only thing that holds me back from really saying that Minnesota can contend is because of their division. Playing Green Bay, playing Detroit, now that Caleb's going to be in the division, it just makes all your divisional games tougher, which is what holds them back. But, I mean, Addison, Jefferson, Hawkinson, and now Aaron Jones with a decent offensive line. I mean, and not even decent. Like, there's some real studs there. Darisaw and Brian O'Neill. I think Bradbury's a stud. Like, I don't know, man. I think their situation's a little better. I think their schedule's going to be tough. But I think Michael Penix could take them into the playoffs as a rookie.
I just don't see a world where they get Penix. I mean, they're sitting at 11 right now. Penix is not going 11 unless everybody is way off about his value around the league.
Do you think is he late first round?
Maybe. I could see it, but I'm seeing a lot of early second as of late.
Really? For Penix?
Yeah.
Wow. I just
McCarthy
don't know how
is the dude who has shot up, man. People think they might need to trade in the top 5 to get JJ, which I, again, think would be a misstep.
I think it's injuries that are, I guess, what's holding. Because, I mean, he
had
had
age. Michael Penix is also 64 years old, but all these guys are older. Like, it's just the new world of college football. Bo Nix is 72.
I think Penix is tough as nails. I think he's pro-ready. And Stetson Bennett was 87 when he got drafted last year.
Yeah, that was a great pick. Stetson Bennett, what a difference maker he's been.
I don't know, man. I'm sold on the kid. I think he's pro ready. I think he could step into a situation and win games.
All right. I'm not even necessarily disputing that. I'm just saying Minnesota with their draft position, if they take Michael Penix, that would be a real shocker. So, yeah, I think if they still have a ways to go overall. Okay. Just a few more moves to get through here. A couple other weird running back signings. Eckler goes to Washington for 2 years, $11 million. Tony Pollard goes to the Titans for 3 years, $24. Do either of those particularly intrigue you? Do you have takes on these running backs getting paid these sort of like mid-level contracts?
I don't really have anything on Pollard. I think it's a cool signing. They needed somebody to replace, Derrick Henry. I like the backup running back that Tennessee has, too. His name is escaping me right now. He's good. Let me see if I can pull up his name real quick. The Eckler one is funny to me, Carson. It's like death taxes in the Washington franchise signing washed players. Just think about it doesn't even matter that they have new ownership. It's like Washington is just doomed to do this every cycle. Deion Sanders, 5 years at age 33. Let me get Bruce Smith after he's done with his stops. Let me get Albert Hainsworth while he's completely washed. It's like Washington is just doomed to make dumb decisions. So go ahead, draft Jaden Daniels, draft J.J. McCarthy, sign Austin Eckler. Eckler's a good underneath, and I think he's a valuable release guy for a rookie quarterback. That's why they signed him to me. It's not a completely horrible signing. Like, because of how talented he is as a receiver, I think he's really valuable for a young quarterback to have, where he's just going to get open underneath, and he'll be a little release valve guy, but he's pretty washed. And then Pollard's a good running back. It's decent value for a guy like him.
Yeah, needle not moved in my opinion. I guess that like the relationship was just going to be done in Tennessee with Derrick Henry no matter what. They're paying Tony Pollard the same amount per year, and they're giving him another year. I know that he's significantly younger, but I don't know. Needle not moved on that one. And Eckler, it's like such a small number in the scheme of things. It's okay. It's not nothing, but $5.7 million a year. Eckler obviously is not all that good. I think a lot of the fantasy enthusiasts have had to maybe come to terms with that. The fact that he's certainly not a good runner of the football. But I see what you're saying when you're talking about him just having a little bit of value as a release valve, a guy you can check it down to for a young quarterback. Ultimately, I don't think that there's anything all that significant about those, except that like these running backs are getting now the second and third contracts, and that's kind of been a question around the league in recent years for guys in this tier. So we've kind of hit on the big additions. Now we got to look at some moves just to retain guys. You mentioned the Bucs bringing back Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans. We talked about how Atlanta is moving up in the division hierarchy, bringing in Kirk. How do you feel that Tampa Bay, your boys, shape up?
Tampa Bay is definitively number 2 in the division for me, and I'm not counting them out. Like an injury to Kirk Cousins or something like that could certainly happen where Atlanta drops. But Atlanta's the most talented team. And like I said, I can't overstate how big of a loss Dave Canales is to this team. The way he could supplement the running game with a short passing game. Just the stuff that they drew up, it was really creative last year in Tampa Bay. And that's a big loss to me. They had to bring back Mike Evans. God bless Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay could, one, not afford to lose Mike Evans because he is the bedrock of this franchise. He is the team leader. He is your guy. You know, it's like, I'm trying to think of a good example. I don't mean this in caliber of player because I think he's so special, but it's like the Steelers losing T.J. Watt, or you know what I mean? It's like Mike Evans is the face of your franchise. You quite literally cannot afford to lose the heart and soul of your team. I think that would have had really detrimental ramifications to this team next year. Not to mention the fact that when Baker needed to make a play, who was he going to? Mike Evans. You just can't lose a guy like that. And I think Mike is as consistent as they come. We all know about the 1,000-yard streak, but it's like he's going to do that again next year. Mike Evans' physical traits since he entered the league have made him super hard to cover, and he always gets open. He's got great hands. Mike Evans is awesome, and I'm glad that they paid the guy. He's earned it, and I hope that he is a Buck for life. And I'm glad they brought back Baker. I think they need Baker too. I don't know how many other quarterbacks. Like I said, I mean this because I'm sold on Michael Penix. I think Michael Penix could come into a situation like this and win football games. Any win-now situation, I think Penix is made for. He is a pro-style
Bro is
passer
pushing
to
the
me.
Michael Penix agenda.
I am, and so I thought Tampa Bay, if they didn't retain Baker, Michael could have been an alternative that they explored. But Baker's a winner. He's poised. He's experienced. He knows what he's doing, and he's a stabilizer. He's not a guy that I think is going to take him on a deep playoff run or anything like that. And I think Tampa Bay has some other holes that they need to address. One, they need another starting corner, point blank. They lose Carlton Davis. Carlton Davis was awesome for them last season. Number one, Tampa Bay has to invest in another cornerback. I think they have to invest in offensive line too. Cornerback and offensive line. If Tampa Bay does that, I can see them being a wild card team next year with Baker at the helm. But the Dave Canales loss is a big one. Losing Carlton Davis is a big loss. So if they crush the draft, I can see Tampa Bay being a wild card team in the NFC.
Yeah, well, obviously they were just in the playoffs. They won a playoff game. They're in a tough spot as a football team, I feel, because they're pretty good, but they're very much locked into that range. And now they have really locked themselves further into that range. But at the same time, it's like, all right, if you don't invest in Baker and Mike Evans, well, you're just going to suck now.
Yeah.
And you don't, at least this offseason, have the assets to replenish, right? You were too good. You don't have an elite draft pick. So I get it. The Baker contract, I'm just a little bit concerned about when you're talking about 3 years, $100 million. Baker proved me wrong. Baker was good last year. Well, he was certainly an average starting quarterback. There were some high highs and there were certainly some low lows, Logan. You can't act like there weren't weeks where Baker just sucked. All right? You can't rewrite history. But he's clearly a starting level guy. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of the same concern that we expressed earlier of like, all right, paying a guy in that range for multiple years, $35 million. It's not the biggest. It's certainly not the most egregious quarterback contract that we've seen given out, but this is an outlier for Baker in terms of recent seasons. And I get circumstances have been worse. Health was a question, all that. It's just having to pay him immediately off a season like that makes me a little bit uncomfortable. But overall, you had a successful season. It makes sense to invest in the guys who are really key to driving that.
Yeah, and it's hard to gauge what other teams are offering him. You know what I mean? Because I said after the season ended, Baker's a guy that I would pay $20 to $30 million, somewhere in that range. And this is around there. So I probably would have paid Baker this, but I think the reason that you gave him this is because you just don't know what other teams are trying to throw at him. And considering how much of a leader he was for this team, considering how much of a face he was for this franchise,
yeah,
like you said, I think Tampa Bay's hand was forced because they won a playoff game and were so successful.
It'd be tough to move on from Baker after last year. I would have preferred, like, hey, all right, Baker, here's your prove-it deal. Do it again. But I think that you're right. The market probably would have demanded otherwise. Somebody probably would have given him multiple years at a clip close to this. Maybe the most impactful in terms of the landscape of the NFL, the real contenders when we talk about re-signings, though, is that the Chiefs got things worked out with Chris Jones. They give him 5 years, up to $160 million, unprecedented contract for a defensive tackle. What's your take on this, Logan? How much does this matter for the Chiefs?
It's huge. I mean, you can't lose a guy like this. I would have paid Chris Jones whatever amount of money Chris Jones asked for. He is, for my money, the best defensive tackle in football. And people will say Aaron Donald, people might say Matt Abuke. Nobody disrupts a game, in my opinion, quite like Chris Jones from the interior of the defensive line. Down to the final play of the Super Bowl when he got a crucial pressure on Brock Purdy that forced him to throw a ball sooner than he wanted. You know, there was a wide open receiver on that play. Who got through the line? It was Chris Jones. You're going to pay that guy whatever he asked for. He is one of the handful of best defensive players on planet Earth. But you're right. I mean, it puts the Chiefs in quite a predicament. You had to choose between Tyreek and what you were going to do. And they saw this coming down the line. I think it's why Kansas City moved off of Tyreek. They said, we can't pay all these guys. You got 3 superstars. And this is going to force Kansas City to absolutely crush the draft the next couple of seasons. You cannot make a mistake on a pick. You're paying Mahomes, you're paying Kelsey, and now you're paying Chris Jones. That's a lot of your salary cap tied up into 3 guys. Kansas City has to crush the draft. The past couple of years, they have. Getting, Snead, getting McDuffie, getting Bolton, getting Willie Gay. They've killed the draft. Kansas City has to keep doing that. That is how they're going to keep this dynasty alive with the bedrock guys that they have locked up on contracts.
Yeah, it is a little bit scary to be paying a guy who's going to be 30 when next season starts for 5 years like this, but it's really non-negotiable. It's what you said. You had to give him everything he wanted. You had to give him the moon. You had to give him a stake in the franchise. You had to give him a lovely dinner with Jackson Mahomes if that's what he wanted. Like, Chris Jones is just more impactful to this team than anybody outside Patrick Mahomes, clearly than Tyreek Hill. And I don't mean to diminish Tyreek Hill's value as probably the best receiver in football, but we have seen that Super Bowl window not just remain open, we've seen them now win it in consecutive years without Tyreek because of the formula of best quarterback on the planet, best defense. If I had to choose between Travis Kelce and Chris Jones, I mean, I would pay Chris Jones going forward. And that's not to say that maybe he has been the most valuable, but Kelce's just not at his peak anymore. And obviously he's 34 years old. They're in different stages. Like, this man, alongside Patrick Mahomes, is the face of this franchise for the next half decade and was of this Super Bowl run. So you pay him whatever it takes, and I'm glad that they got that worked out. The Seahawks slogan, re-sign Leonard Williams. Maybe not as big a deal as the Chris Jones signing, but still really, really elite defensive lineman, can play both on the inside and the outside after they traded for him this past year. How do you feel about that for Seattle, a team that we had playoff aspirations for and they came close but ended up just missing it at 9-8? Are they moving up in your hierarchy?
No, I mean, to me, Seattle needs way more on the interior of the defensive line. This was the biggest flaw with this team. I believe the Pittsburgh Steelers ran for, I think, I think we ran for 200 yards on Seattle.
Checking. Yeah, 202.
Yeah, we decimated Seattle. Every team in the NFL ran on Seattle, and that's why I feel bad for Leonard Williams. He is the one shining star on a abysmally bad defensive line. Get him some help. That's my answer for Seattle. Great. You brought back a great defensive lineman. Can you get him somebody else that can plug a hole, that can get some pressure? It's not a needle mover for me. Seattle is trending downwards.
Fair. I think that we were optimistic, and generally people were optimistic that maybe that defense could take a bit of a step forward from just being really bad in 2022, and they made some moves in the offseason. Ended up really not making a huge difference, even though a guy like Witherspoon obviously had an awesome rookie season. It is because of what you laid out with their issues up front, just not being able to stop the run. So I think it's important to keep Leonard, but yeah, in an NFC that isn't the strongest, but when you're talking about the NFC West, like, you're going to have to go through the Niners. I don't think that they're really trending upwards for me either. All right. Last specific situation that we'll discuss, Logan, and if we miss anything, sorry, or if by the time you listen to this, something else has happened, sorry. Free agency's moving fast. This is a crazy free agency. T. Higgins has been tagged, so Cincinnati has him under control for another year, but he wants out. He's requested a trade. What do you make of that situation, and is there anywhere that you would particularly like to see him end up?
I mean, I just deal him. Who cares? I got Jamar Chase. I don't.
Wow.
I mean, T. Higgins is cool.
Take that, T, you nerd.
But if he wants out and you have him under contract for 1 year, it's like a superstar in basketball with 1 year left on his contract. At the trade deadline, I'm dealing him. If he wants out, well, I'm not just going to let an asset go for free. I got to get something back for that asset. So if a team offers me a 4th-round pick, 5th-round pick, I'd probably listen for T. And again, I'm sorry. I know a lot of people don't really understand with all the blockbuster deals that goes on. NFL draft picks are just inherently more valuable, and they're harder to gauge. It's like somebody asked the other day, they were like, would you trade Deontay Johnson? Well, we paid Deontay Johnson. He's got a decently sized cap hit. I would deal Deontay Johnson for a 4th or a 5th round pick. And people are like, oh, Deontay's way better than that. No, he's not. He's not. I would take a 4th or a 5th round receiver to get him on a rookie contract for 4 years. And I'd rather have that than Deontay Johnson. The same kind of goes for T. Higgins. If I got to pay him real money, I would rather just have a rookie receiver that I can scout and pick in the 4th or 5th round and have on a rookie deal. Spots that I'd like to see him go, send him to New England. I mean, damn, man. Get them a competent receiver. Send him to where he's needed. I think Cincinnati has overwhelming wideout talent. I think when you have, they just signed, they got Mike Gesicki coming in here. When you got Jamar Chase, when you got Tyler Boyd, I'm okay with letting him walk if he wants to leave and wants to depart. I don't know why you'd want to stop playing with Joe Burrow of all people, but, whatever floats your boat, man. I'd send him to the Giants. I'd send him to New England. I'd send him maybe to the Chargers to give Herbert some help. Carolina, maybe give Bryce Young some help. Bottom line is, it's like Mike Tomlin said, man, and I believe in this fundamental philosophy. We don't want hostages. We want volunteers. We want guys who want to be here. If a guy doesn't want to be on my team, I don't want him there either. So I would explore trading away T. Higgins.
I wouldn't want to dismiss T. Higgins. I do think he's really, really good. I think he's a really good number 2. I mean, he is like a pretty dominant athlete, very explosive on the outside. I would certainly want to have him as my number 2 receiver. But if he wants out, he wants out. Tyler Boyd is a free agent as well, so we'll see if Cincinnati brings him back. But if you do, with Jamar, I don't think that you would be devastated by the loss of T. Higgins. I don't think it's ideal, but yeah, you probably can't pay him the money that he wants. If he wants to be paid like a number 1 receiver, you can't do that. And that's kind of the problem that pops up for me with a lot of these contenders. A lot of teams I think would love to have T. Higgins, but I'm thinking about this from the perspective of a Bills fan. I would love to have T. Higgins. I'm not paying T. Higgins $20 million a year when we already have Stephon Diggs. So that's why I do look at a younger team where cap isn't as much of a concern. And I like Carolina because they have a couple of seconds to work with.
Send him back close to home, too, man. 1 state away from Clemson.
Yeah. Well, isn't he initially from Tennessee? I'm pretty sure that he went to rival high school of Peyton. Yeah, Oak Ridge. Peyton, the guy who hosts our Trivia Gauntlet, went to, Gardner Webb? Gardner Webb is a college. So anyways, there's a fun fact about T. Higgins being from Tennessee. But a young team, obviously, Houston is pretty damn good at receiver, but people were talking about them as being a contender for Mike Evans. They have cap. I wouldn't mind seeing him go to a situation like that. They don't necessarily need him, but it's just a question of who can pay him, who can afford to be like, all right, we will maybe slightly overpay for a T. Higgins, or we don't have a number 1 who is already taking up a significant cap hit at receiver. Those are the sort of situations where I think make sense. And Carolina, we're seeing invest big in the offensive line. That's great. That's huge. You also got to give him a stud at receiver, and T. Higgins would not be a bad start to that equation. All right, we've talked about a whole bunch of moves. Is there anybody, Logan, who you think has just lost free agency so far? If it's from bad moves or if it's from a lack thereof, who would be your loser so far?
2 teams stick out at the forefront of my mind. The first is the Dolphins. I believe they've lost 7 starters already. It's just tough. I mean, when you lose that many assets, especially all the guys they've lost offensively, this is not a great defense anyway, and they've lost a lot of important pieces. Wilkins, Van Ginkel, those guys are great. I mean, that Christian Wilkins, another guy that we didn't talk about today, but I mean, going to the Raiders to pair up with Max Crosby is a huge move.
Huge fan of touching Josh Allen's balls, Christian Wilkins. Glad to have him out of the division. He can leave our quarterback unmolested. Have you seen all the times that Christian Wilkins has grabbed at and touched Josh Allen's balls?
I can't say that's been on
Logan, it's been documented at least 5 or 6 times. I'm going to send you. I have a folder. I mean, it is really weird stuff, man.
Right after this pod, man, I'm going to check that out. I'm going to do a deep dive.
And guess what? It doesn't matter because Josh lights him up anyways. He owns the Fins.
Miami definitely is a loser. And then I just say Dallas. It's just so funny to me. Jerry Jones, we're all in on Dak this year. The only move the Dallas Cowboys have made as of this recording is they re-signed their long snapper. Yeah, man, we're all in on Dak. I don't know, Dallas. Y'all might want to make up and make a move. I mean, they lost Pollard. I don't know, man. Dallas and Miami are probably my 2 biggest losers.
Yeah, I think the Miami obviously stands out just because of how much talent they lost. At the same time, maybe their biggest loss was Christian Wilkins, who the Raiders signed away. And I don't necessarily love what the Raiders have done. I mean, they bring in Gardner Minshew and Like, I guess that they're going to
You're
try
not
to
fired
get
up
their
on
guy
the
in
Gardner
draft.
Minshew signing.
Shout out Gardner, but it's just like investing $110 million, I think it is, in Christian Wilkins. And
Dude, the Raiders are making that playoff push next year, bro. Shout out Mikey.
do you really think so? Shout out Mikey. He was hyped on Christian Wilkins.
Yeah, dude, Gardner Minshew has enough.
You're in on the Raiders.
Gardner Minshew has enough swag to make it work in Vegas.
Bro,
man.
you love a quirked up white boy so
Yeah.
much. If an MF has a mustache,
Look.
if an MF puts a headband on, if an MF is willing to scramble and he's not a crazy athlete, but he's just got big balls, Logan Camden will sell his soul for that
Dude,
man.
They go from a white boy with no swag, Aiden O'Connell, to a quirked up white boy with swag in Gardner Minshew. I think the Raiders win.
Say it, 17.
They go undefeated, win the Super Bowl. Gardner Minshew, Super Bowl MVP. I think the Raiders are a sneaky, sneaky wild card team potentially next year.
Yeah, all right. I don't know, dude. When you don't have the quarterback, it just doesn't matter. I mean, shout out to how that defense performed down the stretch last year, but they, to me, very much still feel like they are in football purgatory. And Wilkins, very good player, just an interesting guy to kind of become like the bedrock of your defense, your football team, considering just Devontae's age and some uncertainty. I don't know. They're weird. And also, can I just say, Justin Fields, how about that? I mean, he's a loser of this whole situation. Like, where the hell is he going to go?
Dude, it's strange to me that there's like zero interest in him across the league. And I don't know if it was the fourth quarter numbers. I don't know if it's how teams perceive him as a passer. Here's my thing. You know, quarterback has a lot to do with situation, and taking a young quarterback and giving him a defensive-minded head coach without a good offensive line, without a good running game, without a bunch of receivers, you know, you're asking Fields to be your entire offense. And I just think collectively, as a sports, you know, conglomerate, are we just forgetting that Justin Fields ran for 1,000 yards in a single season? Like, that's my one thing that I come back to with Justin Fields is it's like, you know, a lot of these quarterbacks are very similar in the things that they do averagely, right? You look at a Baker, and he's a very average quarterback, but he can make the throws and he can make the plays. Fields, I think, is a below-average passer, but he has one exceptional special trait that you can really weaponize, and that's his legs. And he's one of the best scramblers and fastest quarterbacks we've ever seen. I just think that if you committed to him and you tailored an offense around what he does at an exceptional level, which is running the football, that you could have a really good offense behind him. I don't know. There are still teams to me, Carson, that need quarterbacks. Minnesota has Sam Darnold, so I assume that they are off the field sweepstakes. I still think that Washington is an interesting one. They're going to draft a quarterback, so that's off the table.
Denver.
I mean, the last two destinations to me that are available are Denver and New England.
But New England's going to take somebody.
Exactly.
At 3.
And so it's like, are the Denver Broncos going to... I don't really think Sean Payton is down for, oh, man, we're going to move from Russell Wilson. If he didn't trust Russell Wilson to make decisions down the field, do you think he's going to trust Justin Fields? I don't know, man. I just cannot believe that collectively everyone is low. What's it going to take? A fifth? A fourth? Are the Bears asking too much? Is nobody offering any draft picks? I mean, to me, I would give up a fourth-round pick in the blink of an eye for Justin Fields. He has an exceptional trait, the speed.
I think it's going to be more than a fourth that he demands. I think at least a third.
You think it's just the value is too much? The teams aren't willing to give up that kind of capital?
No, because that's not crazy value. I'm just saying I think that he's going to demand more than just a fourth. But I think teams are kind of out on... through 3 years, guy who really hasn't shown the development you would want to see in terms of processing the game, in terms of his ability to make those throws downfield. I mean, he is a 99.9th percentile athlete. He and Lamar and Mike Vick, like in terms of pure dynamism as rushers, that's the number one tier of all time. He's up there with those guys as a pure rusher, but he is way behind as a passer and obviously way behind as an all-around quarterback. I'm just saying, like, what we have seen him do as a scrambler, as a designed runner, it is unfathomable how fast he is, how twitchy he is in the open field. But I don't think a bunch of teams are like dying to give up picks or even a pick and then have the dilemma of, all right, are we going to pay this guy big money? But if you're Denver, I would do it because otherwise, what are you going to do? Like take a guy later in the draft because they're sitting at 12. If McCarthy's gone, the NFL consensus, at least, there's not a fifth quarterback who they're likely to take in that range, but they have to do something. So they're maybe the one team that I would look at, but I think that you also make a good point. It's like, is Peyton going to want to go from one guy who he didn't want to commit to long-term or who they had committed to long-term, but who he didn't like, to then another guy where it's like, okay, Justin Fields is going to be seen as the face. He's not going to be considered a bridge quarterback. It's going to be like, all right, let's make this work because he still has that sort of profile. I get it's not the most intriguing, but Justin Fields deserves a starting shot somewhere.
Yes, he does.
I'm not super confident in him panning out. I don't think he's a franchise guy. He's a starter somewhere because he is that sort of exceptional athlete. And if you put the right pieces around him, he could have a very good season, right? If you put him in Atlanta last year, they probably would be in the playoffs. We have years where Desmond Ritter's a day one starter, man. Justin Fields should be a day one starter. There's no question about that. Any final free agency thoughts as we wrap up this behemoth, Logan?
Steelers Nation, let's weld.
Steelers Nation, let's weld, dude. I just don't know if a coastal elite like Russell Wilson, married to a pop star who publicly cuckolded him, is going to fit in with the culture of salt of the earth, American people, laborers like the Pittsburgh Steelers and their fandom. I just don't know, Logan.
Neither do I, my friend.
But you got to be unlimited. You got to be unlimited. Speaking of salt of the earth people, today I saw my grandfather's mining license.
From when?
Like, I don't know, 1948 or something. Somewhere in there. My grandpa died a few years ago. He was 94. No, it was in, I think, Ontario, it said, which I didn't know that he lived there. My father was raised in Montreal, Quebec, but I think it said Ontario mining license.
Who knew you needed a license to go and mine, man?
That's what I'm saying, man. Just send me down there with a canary and I'm good to go.
Yeah,
I can mine.
Give me a pickaxe and a light on my forehead. I'm ready to go.
For real.
Man.
But you know who couldn't? Russell Wilson, because he's not that kind of guy, and the Steelers are going to eat him alive because of that. All right, everybody. That's going to do it for us here today. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, the good news is there's plenty more Nerd Sesh content, mostly basketball at this time of year, but obviously big NFL news here. We had to address that. And if anything more big breaks throughout free agency, which it probably will, we may do another show or we may just integrate it with our basketball talk. So stay tuned for all that. On YouTube, you can watch. Across audio platforms, you can listen. If you want to stay tuned into updates from the show, clips from the show, and catch all of our trivia content, you can follow us across social media, TikTok and Instagram at NerdSesh, Twitter at Nerd_Sesh. And if you want to check out our merch, the flags behind us, we got hats, we got shirts, we got hoodies. All that is at thevolume.com. You can also join our Discord at the link tree across our social media bios to talk NFL, NBA, movies, whatever the hell else you want. There is a place for it in our Discord. So with that, as always, appreciate you guys. I've been Carson Brabber.
I've been Logan Camden.
And this was Nerd Sesh.